food distribution systems in Tripoli, for example, start deteriorating. And we're going to have to figure out how do we potentially get food in there. So there are a whole range of options, military and non-military, that we're examining.
The option the U.S. Senate has been pushing is the implementation of a no-fly zone, one influential senator dismissing military objections that it could be a challenge. This as Pentagon officials confirm they believe the Libyan Air Force is engaged in the fight.
It seems to me that we could neutralize very easily a very antiquated air defense system with old airplanes and obviously not very good pilots fairly easily. And then that would help the people who are sacrificing their very lives as we seek.
Another senator says the president should be ready to take it a step further.
I think we should be open to providing them with arms if they need it to succeed in their revolution.
Secretary of State Hillary Clinton testified that they are a long way from making any decision on a no-fly zone. President Barack Obama says he wants the ability to respond rapidly, but gave no indication that he's going to do anything soon. Patty Culhane, Al Jazeera at the White House.
Ali Ajali is Libya's former ambassador to the U.S. He quit last week, saying he could no longer support a government which attacked its own civilians. He wants restrictions on Libyan airspace as soon as possible.
On the non-fly zone, this is very important issue because now Gaddafi, he is start to strike in east part and in the middle, and he yesterday and today he strike very important area which is where the oil supply go to Europe and to the world, and then fly zone that they will strike the strategic points which paralyze this regime, to allow the Libyan people in the east to march, to rescue their relatives, their families, who are suffering now under a very control of the army of loyal to the Gaddafi.
Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez continues to push his mediation plan, despite the idea being rejected by Libyan opposition groups and Western governments. Protesters there have added their voices to the uprising, chanting slogans in support of the Libyan people. They condemned Chavez's proposal to work with Gaddafi, whom they labeled a murderer. The Venezuelan president accuses the United States of exaggerating the uprising. Well, Muammar Gaddafi and his allies have also been warned that they risk becoming war crime suspects. The International Criminal Court has announced a full investigation into alleged human rights violations in Libya. Speaking at The Hague, prosecutor Luis Moreno Ocampo said Gaddafi supporters have been identified and will be charged. Government officials from the Netherlands negotiating with Libyan authorities for the release of 3 Dutch Marines. They were captured on Sunday by pro-Gaddafi forces in the coastal city of Sirte. Dutch officials say the Marines were trying to rescue 2 Europeans who have since been handed over to the Dutch embassy in Tripoli. From the Gulf to North Africa, tens of thousands of people are expected to rally across the Arab world on Friday as they keep up the pressure for reforms. Anti-government protesters in Yemen are not letting up on their demand for President Ali Abdullah Saleh's immediate resignation. They rejected a proposal by some opposition groups for Saleh to leave office by the end of the year. Well, clashes were reported in Bahrain on Thursday between Sunnis and Shias. Youths armed with sticks and batons charged at one another on the streets of Hamad, south of the capital. It's the first time the two sides have openly clashed since protests demanding constitutional reforms began 2 weeks ago. And in Oman, thousands of people gathered on Thursday for a large pro-government rally. They gathered outside the palace of the longtime ruler Sultan Qaboos bin Said in the northeastern town of Mana. At the same time, pro-reform groups staged a 6th straight day of protests in the capital, Muscat. Hundreds of Tunisians have celebrated after the interim president announced elections on July 24th. The polls are to elect a new council to form a new constitution. But this also means Fouad Mabaza will stay in power well beyond his March 15th deadline. And Egypt's interim military rulers have appointed a new prime minister. Essam Sharaf will take over from the unpopular Ahmed Shafiq after his surprise resignation on Thursday. Sharaf, a former transport minister, has been asked to form a government. And these are live pictures from Liberation or Tahrir Square in the Egyptian capital. Pro-democracy campaigners camped there, celebrating the announcement that Shafiq would be replaced by SM Sharaf. And a big rally is expected there after Friday prayers. Well, let's now join our correspondent Ayman Mohaldeen, who's overlooking Tahrir Square. Ayman, tell us what we can expect today.
Well, we're certainly expecting, as we have been over the past several weeks, thousands of Egyptians gathering here in what really has become the symbolic heart of the struggle for so many of the protest movements across the Arab world. You can probably hear behind me the sounds of the Quran being recited, because it's in a short while that Friday prayers are expected to begin. And after Friday prayers, you expect thousands of more to gather here, continue to celebrate, and continue to try to keep some kind of public pressure on the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces. Now, obviously, this week's protests were called really to demand the ousting of the Prime Minister Ahmed Shafiq. He has already been replaced with the incoming Prime Minister, Dr. Assam al-Sharaf, and so certainly it is very welcome news. So the tone of today's protest has shifted slightly from being one of protest and demanding he resign to now of one of celebration. They still have a long list of demands, but certainly we're expecting today's protest not to be as significant as we've seen in previous weeks, and even the organizers themselves are anticipating that. They have asked the protesters actually to go home at the end of the day, not to camp out as we have seen over the past several weeks here in Tahrir Square.
I mean, since Mubarak stepped down, there have been huge changes within the government and the political system, but it doesn't seem to have dampened the protesters' appetite. Why do you think it's that they're still showing up at the square and still rallying when these changes are still being made?
Well, from the protesters' perspective, they want genuine and real change. They want sustainable change. They don't want cosmetic change. And so the concern was that after President Hosni Mubarak stepped down from power, the immediate changes that took place seemed somewhat cosmetic. It was still the same prime minister that served under former President Hosni Mubarak that continued to rule. And so they wanted to make sure that not only in terms of the prime minister's position being changed, but they also wanted to see the release of political prisoners. They want to see the Supreme Council take concrete steps to ensure free and fair elections. They want to see an end to the emergency law that has been used to govern Egypt for 30 years. So these are a long list of demands that they have. They want to keep the public protest visible so that they show and send a clear message to the rulers of this country that despite President Mubarak stepping down, it was about substantial change, not just simply cosmetic change.
Ayman Mohaldeen live for us from Cairo against the backdrop of Tahrir Square, where protests are once again taking place. We'll recap the latest from Libya in a moment, plus funerals for opposition fighters killed defending the Brega oil terminal. A full report is coming up. And rallying for reform Indonesian style, the lessons from a former dictatorship, now the beacon of democracy in Southeast Asia. That's next.
Hello, would you believe we have yet another winter storm making its way across the United States?